Hello, I'm Joel.
And I'm Alex.
Welcome to the Commander's Journey, the place where we discuss our favorite format of Magic, Commander, from the perspective of a new player.
And an experienced one. So, Joel, I want you to talk with me about what colors interest you the most, or what colors were you first attracted to when you were starting to play Magic?
I think the colors that I was most attracted to at the beginning was black and white. I first started playing Magic in February of this year, and I started with a few decks my brother gave me. Found out about Arena pretty quickly, and when I got on Arena, I would see Ajani, I would see these Life Gain and these Life Drain type cards in black and in white, and I love playing those cards. Used the pre-con decks they gave me on Arena, and it was easy for me to understand. And sometimes when I would play against red or blue, it would be more difficult for me to get it. And then I started seeing some of the black and green, and I was like, oh yeah, I get green, but red and blue, although those are like probably the most traditional colors, were like the furthest from my mind. I think the first few months I was playing Magic, but yeah, black and white for sure.
So when you were looking at black and white for the first time, and you were like, I like this, I like black, I like white, would you say it was the life gain aspects, or what about those colors would you say specifically drew you to them?
I think because I didn't have to, I think people would beat me by either, when people milled me, it really frustrated me. I was just playing, or they would burn me, they would just be playing shocks over and over again. It was like, oh man, this game's going too fast. I don't like the way it's playing. But when I was playing black and white, it was fun because, like, say with Ajani or Ajani's Pridemate, I could build them up. I can have life and then build my creature in kind of, a term I didn't know then, but I know now, go wide with my board, so I can have all these things going on and kind of trigger off each other. So that was a fun part for me. It was having all my cards synergizing and then having some big, huge state on the board to do something.
I can see why you liked Commander after that.
I guess so. Yeah, I think I kind of naturally, gravitated towards that kind of game. So,
well, it makes sense to me. What is funny too, Joel, is I noticed you had a similar experience to me. Now, I didn't have the same appeal as white to white. I do end up liking white and black myself quite a bit as well. When I first started, green is what interested me the most, and then I decided black was my favorite. Though I've never been too attached to black and green together. I just thought green had the coolest creatures when I was starting playing, and then I kind of liked, especially early on when I really at least tried to understand what the different colors did. I liked the fact that black felt like it could do anything. I just would have to give a little bit for it, and I really liked that flexibility. That I understand a little bit differently now, but at the time period, I was interested in that quite a bit.
Yeah, and I didn't quite know starting off. Like nobody told me. I didn't realize that the different colors had things they did better than the other colors. I just knew that these pre-con decks that were on Arena for black and white were just really cool and fun to play, and I didn't have to do too much. I could just pick them out and start playing around, take cards out, put new cards in if I wanted. And so, but yeah, then as I learned what the different power of all the different things that all the colors did, then I got more interested, I think, in the other colors. But
well, it makes total sense to me again, and I was a similar boat. Honestly, I didn't understand the appeal of white, and now I rather like white as a color in my decks. White was probably the color that I spent the most amount of time trying to wrap my brain around and how I felt about it. And Commander has a different feeling behind it, but I know for me anyways, white was the one that I didn't realize how much I liked it until I kind of was in the middle of it and kept on picking, and I was like, hey, maybe I actually really like this color as well. So I think we have a similar feeling or appeal with our color choices. We have a lot of overlap there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and whatever like attracts you to Magic, I think the appeal of it was all the cool things that everything did together. Like I like playing poker, I like playing chess growing up with my grandpa. But when I was playing Magic, it was kind of like, to me, it was similar to both of those things, where it's like chess in a way because you got your pieces and you're moving them and trying to go against your opponent. But with poker, it's also fun because you're just like, you don't quite know what the other person has, and you could have something or not have something. So I think the complexity of the game is what drew me to it for sure.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. And it's one of those things, too. I think it's kind of funny how the complexity of the game can both really, once you're ready to tackle it, it's like a really appealing part. But I think it's one of those things that sometimes intimidates newer players. So it's one of those just trying to bridge that initial gap, try to, wrap your head around it. But once you're kind of in it, you're in it, which is kind of funny. I think there's a point where your world's your oyster out of nowhere.
For sure. And on that note, we're, with the Commander's Journey, with this podcast, we are here for new players. And we want them to feel like, they can come here to get as much information as they can. And today we want to talk about building our first Commander deck, or just the blueprint of how to build a deck.
Exactly, and this is one of those things. You don't need to follow this mount for a mount, but we do highly recommend you do, especially this is one of the first decks you're ever building. We're mostly coming at it from the opinion of like building it from scratch, but I'm going to honestly recommend picking up a pre-con first. That's a fantastic way to start, and you can even look at this episode after you get your pre-con if you want to make some changes. And you can kind of see where the pre-cons lack in terms of certain categories we're going to talk about, and fill in those missing cards to meet those criteria, because honestly it's going to make the deck function much more consistently.
Yeah, and it's really important for new Commander players to understand. Those pre-cons that I got on Arena, the black-white ones, the different color combinations, or the monocolor ones, they were already broke down for me. Like, there's a standard amount of lands and a standard amount of creatures and different things you want in your decks, depending on what format you're playing. And that was kind of already set up for me, which allowed me to just play the game and have fun. And I think with Commander, that's what you're saying, right, Alex? Is pick up a pre-con, enjoy it, see if you like this format, play it, and then after you've been doing that for a while, you can come back here, listen to the rest of this, and see that this is kind of a general breakdown. So if you want to make it your own or make one from scratch, you can. You'll have the blueprint to do that.
Exactly, and I think, when you're trying to pick your commander for the first time, it's a little intimidating, which is kind of nice with the pre-cons. It does some of that work for you. You're not going in quite blind, or, it does some of the archetype work for you and some of the synergy type work for you for those decks.
Yeah, and, there's people that have been playing Commander for a long time. They still pick up the pre-cons. These ones this year, 2019, were done really well. So, that's definitely a buy. And something that's been getting me excited is Magic just put out these Brawl decks. And I was like, man, that's really close to Commander.
They really have some cool Brawl commanders, really.
And some great Brawl decks. And so I ended up picking up Korvold, Fakehurst King. And I was really excited about this. So I picked it up and I'm like, I'm just going to look at all the other cards I already have from the boxes I bought and things lying around, and maybe cards I can trade my friends, and just build it like that. But this card right here got me excited. Korvold Fakehurst King. It's 2 black, red, and green for a legendary creature, Dragon Noble, with flying. Is a 4/4. It says whenever Korvold Fakehurst King enters a battlefield or attacks, sacrifice another permanent. And whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. And like I've been playing this game for not even a year now, probably like 8-9 months, and I have a few decks that I've built. I'm going back to the very first deck that I built. Having a lot to do with sacrifice. This one turned me on. I'm like, I get in black, red, and green. I get to build another sacrifice deck. So I was pretty stoked about that.
For those of you who don't know, Joel's first deck was a Teysa deck that, of course, also was very sacrifice themed. Mm-hmm. And what was funny about the whole thing is that Joel now has more decks than I do, which is really funny. I've been playing Commander not a terribly long time. It's been about maybe 3 or 4 years of playing Commander, mm-hmm. but holy cow, I built like one a year, and you've just blown me out of the water. Not quite, but
just too excited. I want to keep building decks. It's for me, it's part of the fun of it. So hopefully with this, if that also is something, if that's you as well and you enjoy it, then this is a great episode to look at as far as the blueprint for building your deck.
So yeah, so let's say Joel, you're wanting to build Corvold, and you're like, you want a place to start. Now, Corvold has some text on it that kind of helps us get to where we need to go. You want to look for things that get good synergy with it, something that for combo pieces to make either more powerful or less powerful depending on the power level of the deck or the price you want to spend to pay for the cards. But it's really looking for those key cards that would go with that commander. And a good recommendation I have for newer players, especially when you're trying to build a deck from scratch, but even if you want to add cards, is there's a couple online resources that are fantastic.
Yes.
I personally start with EDHREC every single time, edhrec.com. It is the go-to commander website that I use.
For sure. You can go to edhrec.com and say you want to build Corvold, like I do. And there's like already, I haven't looked at it, but at least 50 to 100 decks built. People have built them and they have their lists, or there's just cards that you can look up that'll synergize with it. It has everything in categories. So it's a great, especially for those building commander decks. It's specifically for commander.
And it's one of those websites too. Again, experienced players use it, new players use it, everyone in between. It's one of those places that when you're trying to wrap your head around the commander deck, it's a little intimidating starting from nothing, especially. It allows you to go in, kind of suss out how the deck wants to be built, and then you can start either making your own choices or see some of theirs or a mixture, whatever you want to do to make your deck experience building better.
Awesome. And another great website is scryfall.com. That's SCRY fall.com. And it's great because you can go to the advanced search options in there and say if you want to build Corvold and you're looking at the text where it says whenever you sacrifice a permanent, it's something that Corvold wants because then you're just pumping them up. You can just put the word sacrifice in the text. You can pick your colors. You can do all the advanced search and click and go, and you can just see a bunch of cards from Magic, the history of Magic, and it gives you a bunch of information on it, and you can just sift through that as well. It's another great resource.
Oh, exactly. Definitely my premier way to go to look up cards. And I want to say, too, any website that you're comfortable with, you prefer to use is correct because it is the one you prefer to use. And the other big thing I want to point out, too, that sometimes it's a little intimidating to build a deck from scratch if you're one of those people that, at least for your first few decks, you just kind of want to net deck it, which is looking up a deck online and copying it. Please do that. If that's what you need, the deck building aspect doesn't interest you, or it's a little intimidating, or whatever reason you happen to have, feel absolutely free to do that. A lot of people post their deck lists online, and they'll tell you sometimes a little description with it about the strategy or what you want to be doing. But honestly, you can kind of figure it out as you play it, how much you like it.
And don't feel embarrassed to net deck, build a deck based off something that somebody else did. I mean, the first 2 decks I built, I used internet decks as my foundation. Then I changed it out. The Teysa Karlov deck, I got the majority of that deck from the Commander's Quarters, and then my second deck, which was a Super Friends deck, after I opened War of the Spark, I went on edhrec.com and I saw another person had built a Super Friends deck, and I was like, I have almost all those cards. Let me just build it. So if you do that, don't feel embarrassed to do that. It's a great way to start.
Oh, exactly. And again, whatever gets you into the game, gets you into the format, is valid because it got you into it. It's what interests you. It's what, as a player, excited you and made you want to really enjoy that deck.
Exactly. So let's talk about the standard breakdown of how to build a commander deck. So we want to talk about the cards and the different categories. So as in any format of Magic, you have different categories you want to fill. There's lands, and then there's everything else, creatures, enchantments, sorceries, and stuff. So for a commander deck is your commander plus 99. So it's 100. It's a singleton, so you can have one card of each, except for basic lands can be repeated. And so we want to just quickly go over the what that breakdown is, and then we're going to go over each one in more detail.
And this seems to be a generally agreed upon breakdown for a commander deck, and I do highly recommend, if you're starting doing this for the first few times, not to mess too much with the formula early on. As you get more experience, do what you want to do. But we do recommend you at least follow this for right now, and then you can kind of see where you maybe have a little more than you need, or maybe you need a little more in one of these categories than we have even, and adjust your deck as needed.
Exactly. So the general breakdown is you want at least 37 lands minimum in your deck.
I really don't recommend going lower unless you're really, really, again, an experienced player messing around with that.
And then about 20 to 30 creatures. They'll fit within your strategy. 10 card draw, 10 ramp, 5 single target removal cards, and 5 board wipes. And again, this breakdown is generally agreed upon consensus in the Commander community, with variations as you become more experienced.
So when we're first starting with our deck, we have our commander. You want to pick that first, and that will help dictate what the rest of the deck's going to do. It helps decide your color identity. That's the first step more than anything else. And then right after that, what I personally do is I look at my creatures, try to pick some synergistic creatures that are going to really go with the deck, help support that commander, help support whatever I'm trying to do with the deck. And we talked about the 20 to 30 average creatures. Don't feel bad if you're a little high, if you're a little low. Spell decks will be on the lower end, and tribal decks or creature heavy decks will be on the high end, of course.
Exactly. And if you're of a heavy, like you said, a heavy creature deck, you might have a heavy enchantment deck, but you still want to have enough creatures to put on the battlefield. So 20 to 30, even if it's an enchantment deck, you probably still want 15, 20.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're getting creatures on the battlefield and enchanting them.
Exactly. You need ways to protect your life from getting swung at. If you're the only one at the table that doesn't have a way to protect yourself, you're kind of open to all types of attacks for, helping out lower your life total and helping out the other players, usually with some bonus effects, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So don't feel bad. You don't need to decide all the 20 to 30 right now. Just, it's a good place to start. See where your synergies are. See what the deck's kind of starting to do. Go from there. And if you have a spells deck, one where you're focusing on instant sorceries, enchantments, instead of starting with the creatures, feel free to start there instead, of course. Wherever the main focus of the deck is, basically start with that. And that includes, like, if you have a combo strategy deck, start with that combo, of course. Let's look at that first, put that in the deck, and then move from there.
Yeah. I think it's really important. This is like the meat of your deck, and it's really important to understand your strategy. I think that was a hard thing for me, too, because there's so many things that the commander might be able to do, or there's so many things you might want to do in those color combinations in your deck, but it's really important to just focus in on that one thing, or focus in on those one or two things that you want to do with that commander. Let your commander dictate what that is, or let the colors dictate what that is.
Exactly. And the last thing I'm going to say about this is don't get too far away from what your deck's trying to do. A common mistake I see made with newer players that I realized I made when I was first starting, Joel Holmes made the same mistake, is that, you see a card and then you see a card that does a, effect that's related to it. Perfect. Throw that in your deck. And then you see a card that helps out that second card that where, you want to add that in. And you can do just a little bit of that, but I really recommend every card that you're putting in the deck, especially if early on, you have your commander in mind when you do it. A card that in theory works, synergizes with the whole deck, and not only synergizes with a couple cards you happen to have within it, so you're straying too far away from what the deck wants to do.
Exactly. I just wanted to mention this one card. Is we're looking at Korvold. I was looking at Korvold and looking at that line. This is whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. So I figured that's my strategy for this new deck I'm building. And so a card that, and I believe this card is already in the Brawl Precon, is Mayhem Devil. It's 1, a black and a red for a creature devil. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target, and he's a 3/3. So this is an example of a card that synergizes and supports Korvold perfectly. So I think for those majority of the cards you're looking for cards that will just synergize and support your commander to the nth degree, because your commander is a card you're going to keep trying to bring out. So all the cards you're pulling, you want them all to support. If you start wandering in your strategy, you could kind of go off.
Yeah, exactly. And what I mean by straying away, like let's say you have Mayhem Devil in the same deck with Korvold, you're like, oh, I'm going to be doing a lot of damage when I sacrifice the thing, so then I want stuff that'll increase the damage I do. At that point, we're kind of starting to stray away from what Corvold's doing. Focus more on the beneficiaries to the sacrifice themes, whether it be helping the sacrifice, and don't get too caught up in an extra effect that the card does.
Exactly. So there you go, 20 to 30 creatures on average, and always support your commander and synergize as well as you can. The next category we want to pay attention to is card draw. So it's important to have at least, I'd say, 10 card draw spells. It's important to stay on that high end of that, even if you have a few extra cards, because that's how you keep playing this game. The cards, you want them to keep coming, because if you don't, you start losing your gas almost, right?
And some of the precons, again, won't hit all the same numbers on these categories. Wizards isn't always as on top of them as we in the commander community generally like to be. And early on, you'll see if you build a deck without it versus with following the general guidelines, you'll see the difference pretty immediately. All of a sudden, you'll be sitting there and unable to do stuff in your game. And you're like, well, I can't cast anything. I don't have lands, or I ran out of cards in my hand, or whatever. That's not a fun situation to be in. You always kind of want to have something rolling for you at the table. So following the categories will almost always make the deck work out like how you want.
Exactly. And start there. Look at these numbers and say, I got enough of this, enough of this, enough of this, and then play it and see how it feels. A really great card we can mention real quick for card draw. An example is in blue. It's Rhystic Study. It's 2 and a blue for an enchantment that says whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 mana. This is a very aggressive card, but it's really, really good and powerful because its enchantment sticks around and you could be drawing a lot of cards off it.
It's a very famous card in our format. Sadly, the price, in terms of the actual monetary price for the card, has affected with that. When I started playing Commander, you can get a Rhystic Study for, I think, around $7 to $8, and now it's really ballooned quite a bit past that. And remember, it's an uncommon a common when it was first printed, so that's how much Commander uses this card, because we're the only format using it. It is just such a ubiquitous card with our format that it's kind of been priced. But don't, feel free to not use this one. There are plenty of card draw cards that exist in the game.
Actually, if you listen to our previous episode, we talked about 5 really good budget card draw spells in blue. You can go back and listen. There's tons of spells, and you need more than one anyways, right? So if you got the extra $20-$30, however much it'll cost at the time you buy Rhystic Study, you can put it in your deck. But there's a lot of great options under a few bucks where you can add those in your deck.
I see what you did there with that plug, Joel.
Of course.
Plug the old other episode in there.
Well, we're trying to do that a lot for new players too.
Oh, it's perfect.
We have a bunch of budget. We have more budget episodes coming up, so listen out for them.
Will do.
The next one I think is on the next category.
And I want to last thing I want to say about card draw is focus on cards that will card draw multiple times if possible. It's not necessary, and the more competitive, honestly, the worse that gets. But look at cards that basically you'll draw more consistently, or you'll draw more than one card. It's good when a card replaces itself, but really what you're looking for is more card advantage. You want to draw more cards, like a card that says draw 2 or 3 cards, if possible.
Yeah. Awesome. So the next category is very important. Keeping your deck rolling is
ramp.
Yeah.
And it's, again, this is, you want to have a lot of good ramp cards in the deck. Usually when we talk about ramp, it's taking cards, out of your deck or other places and putting them onto the battlefield, so you're ahead of your opponents in terms of lands. But mostly allows you to get more lands in the field, so you can play more stuff and you can do more stuff on your turns. And our example card for our ramp category is Cultivate. It's 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put one onto the battlefield, tapped, and then the other into your hand, and then shuffle your library. One of the go-to cards in the format for ramp, and it's cheap. It is, if you're playing green, I always highly recommend a Cultivate.
For sure. And it's another part of your, I don't know, if card draw is like the gasoline, I guess ramp's like the oil. I don't know.
Well,
that's kind of a bad example. Anyway,
maybe motor oil, actually, Joel, it could be.
That was a terrible example, but all I'm trying to say is those are the 2 categories that really keep your deck rolling, right? Yeah. And ramp is very important, like what you were just saying. If you want to keep doing things, you have to have enough ramp out there, enough mana out there to do stuff with.
I'm thinking more like you're building your house and your card draws like the plans or the money, the finances to get it happen, and then the ramp is the actual materials and what that you're going to be using to build the house, kind of thing.
Yeah, we were thinking of two completely different
we
examples. But so going back to what Commander is, it's a card game. The fun part of it is you don't want to be the guy like stuck. Like I remember the first few decks when I didn't really have enough card draw, enough ramp. Especially didn't have enough ramp. It's like you're stuck there and everybody's doing 2 or 3 things on the turn and you're like, maybe I could do one thing this turn, and it kind of stinks. So you want to make sure, even if you're not in a great ramp color, there's artifacts, there's different ways to create ramp in your deck and creative ways to do it. So always make sure you have, I'd say have at least 10 ramp spells in there, things that help you build up your mana base.
And again, that ramp spell can be, a mana rock or, a mana dork, which is something that, anything that taps for mana, something that puts more lands on the battlefield, or honestly, in some colors, you might just need to put more lands in your hand and it's just more consistent land drops. It's just something to try to get ahead, make sure you're not behind, try to stay in the game. And again, some colors do it better than others. Green is known for its ramp, just as blue's known for its card draw. And the other colors kind of have to find other workarounds to get to where they need to go with that.
Yeah, but no matter what color you're in, there's always a creative way to make sure you have enough land, enough mana out there to play the game at the same speed everybody else is. That's kind of what you want to aim for. Okay, so the next category we want to talk about is also really important to the game because it makes you feel like you're doing something not just on your turn, but on other people's turns. And this category is, these next 2 things fall into the removal category. We're going to talk about 5 single target removal.
So when we're talking about single target removal, we're talking to like anything that, is aimed at something and then gets rid of it with, targeting. Something that just takes out one thing, can be with sacrifice to whatever it happens to be. But anything that really, it's basically protection. And usually you want it to ideally deal with a permanent, but usually when we're talking about it specifically, you're almost always taking out creatures. So permanent's the ideal thing to hit, but creatures is generally what you're going to be aiming at.
Exactly. And a really popular card and a really great card for single target removal is Swords to Plowshares. It's 1 white for an instant. It says exile target creature and its controller gains life equal to its power. It's just a real inexpensive way at instant speed to get rid of a creature on the board. And I think that's what's really cool about single target removal in Commander specifically, is because it's not always I have all this creature heavy fighting going on. It's like somebody pulls something out that is very dangerous real quick. You want to be able to respond to it. And if you're in blue, I guess you try and counter it. But in white or in these other colors, you have ways to just remove that thing from the board completely.
Exactly. And, think about, too, having some things that say the word exile on it, not just destroy. But it's having that variety, having that ways to deal with things that need to be removed. And also think about your flexibility when you're doing this as well. Stuff that allows you to specifically, you want to have it at instant speed. That way you can respond to what your opponent's doing if you need to right then and there. Sorcery is perfectly fine too, but I think you'll find having a variety is ideal. And
then depending on what colors you have in your deck, there's a few cards out there that'll say like exile or destroy permanent, which also gives you more flexibility because you can aim at a creature or you can aim at an artifact or you can aim at an enchantment that's bothering you. Or there's other ones that are specific to destroying an artifact or destroying enchantment.
Exactly. And a good example card we have for this is Vandal Blast. It's a single red mana for a sorcery. Destroy target artifact you don't control. Or in this case, it also has Overload for 4 and a red. You may cast this spell for its overload cost. If you do, change the text by replacing all instances of target with each. So basically, this is a single target removal spell that if I pay the additional 4 mana for it, I can take out each artifact I don't control, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's like a one-sided artifact board wipe kind of.
Not wrong.
Just gets rid of all those artifacts on the other side of the board.
And we talked about too, it's important to use artifacts to, add some ramp to your deck. You'll generally remove all your opponents. One of those really kind of set them behind in the game. And often they'll have troublesome artifacts that you're trying to get rid of anyway, so it's a win-win.
Especially in Commander, because I feel like most decks have a few artifact ramp spells, even if they're in green, or even if there's always a few out there. So yeah, you can really do some damage because you set them back, right? You set them back a few turns.
Exactly. Anything that kind of slows down their way is just as good for you as if you move forward. The other category is board wipes. So we talked about having 5 board wipe cards in there as well. And board wipes really allow you to get out of those difficult situations where the board has gotten very complex. Maybe it's gotten to a stalemate, or maybe there's just something that can't be targeted, something that you can't get rid of very easily, so you have to just destroy everything to get rid of it as well. Our example card for this is Austere Command. It's 4 white and a white. For a sorcery, you choose 2 of these next options: destroy all artifacts, or destroy all enchantments, or destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 4 or greater. So you got quite a variety of options to take out any type of perm you want, including a variety of creatures, which can be useful for saving your stuff but taking out your opponents.
This has got to be probably one of the better board wipes in the game, and it's still not too expensive to purchase because you have so much flexibility there, right? So if, depending on what you're playing, you could destroy all the creatures because you can do 3 or less and the 4 or greater. Therefore, you just got rid of all creatures. Or if you just need to get rid of enchantments and a bunch of big creatures because you got a bunch of small creatures because you're a sack deck or something of that nature, you have just the flexibility to do it in a few different ways, which not all board wipes are like that. A lot of board wipes are just like destroy everything, and then you're kind of stuck with that. But Austere Command, that's a really good one.
Exactly. And again, we recommend 5 of them. That way, if you lose 1 or use 2, again, a lot of the times it's the only way to play catch up, maybe if you're a little behind, or again, deal with those troublesome cards that are really making it so you can't, win the game.
Mm-hmm. And always have board wipes in your deck, even if you're a creature heavy deck and you're like, well, I don't really want a lot of board wipes because I'll destroy my own creatures. But you'll find sometimes you'll be in a game, even if you're a creature heavy deck and you don't have that much out and your opponent's got so much on the board, you just have to. If you don't wipe the board, you don't stand a chance of coming back.
Exactly. It's just something to really reset the game and allow it to not get too out of hand unfavorably to you.
No. And the last category we want to talk about is your lands. And so it's we don't really have to go into too much depth here, but you want a minimum of 37 lands, and at least 40 mana sources, and that's including, I guess, some of your ramps, some rocks maybe. But 37 to 40 is a great number to kind of settle in on as far as having that much land. And also, I would say this about land in Commander. I'd say about half of your lands are common lands, but the other half will be just utility lands of different that also support the strategy you're going for, and are dual lands that have both or more than one color on them, so that they can help support the colors that you're in.
Exactly. And what we mean by mana sources, additional things to add mana sources. You don't need this for every deck, but especially decks that aren't playing green. It's nice to have a couple rocks or artifacts that tap for mana. And think about having 40 mana sources in total just to help with the consistency of the deck. Again, not a requirement, but I do recommend it if you're first building or you're building your first deck. That it's a very useful thing to have, and you'll find it will allow you to ramp or keep up with other decks in surprising ways.
All right.
So after you build that, Joel, you'd probably want to fill in the rest of your deck. Find cards that, we're talking about all these categories, right? You want to find cards that will overlap with both the strategy of what your commander's trying to do or what your deck's trying to do, as well as the stuff that will, hit these categories. So like we could have a card draw spell that's has to work with your commander, or a ramp spell that also works with your commander. Just something that can hit multiple categories at the same time.
Yeah, and that gives your deck so much more flavor, and it gives you more of a chance to hit everything you want, because you're not going to draw your entire deck every game. So the more flexibility each card has, the better.
So this is going to be one of our longer episodes. This is what we're going to call the next level episodes, really increasing your skill or your ability at the game of Commander. And we're going to take what we're going to call the extra step, which is the extra step that we're going to go into extra detail, provide you some extra value to our newer listeners to really help build a better Commander deck for the first time. So today's extra step, we're going to talk about adding 2 more categories. These are going to be in much smaller numbers, but it's something when I deck build I think about, and I definitely guarantee a lot of more confident players think about this as well, and I recommend to our newer players have this in mind if possible as you deck build.
Yeah, and a lot of these different categories, again, we were just saying you're going to have flexibility in your creatures or in some instances, enchantments or things in your deck that are going to allow you to do multiple things. So the extra step, we'll talk about these different, these other categories we feel are important for most decks, but depending on your commander and depending on your strategy too, they'll be more or less important too.
Exactly. And again, sometimes this might be your strategy even, and then sometimes, having at least a little bit of this I think is extremely helpful. So our first category we're going to add in, I recommend at least having 2 recursion spells that are spells that allow you to get stuff back from the graveyard. Our example card from this is Eternal Witness. It's 1 green and a green for a creature human shaman. It's a 2/1, and when Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. And it's just one of those cards. You can get any card you want, just put it back in your hand, and allows you to, if they got rid of that thing you're really relying on, you can get that card back.
And this is really an extremely powerful card. And as a new player, I would overlook little things. And one of the little things I overlooked with this, when I think somebody told me this is a great card you should put in your deck, is that when Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card. So that's any card. And like a lot of other recursion spells, you'll see it'll say like return a target creature from your graveyard to your hand or to the battlefield. And I thought, why is this powerful? It just goes from your graveyard to your hand, doesn't even go to the battlefield, but it's any card. So if you needed to go get that single target removal or board wipe again, or whatever card that is in your graveyard, you get to play it again because of Eternal Witness.
And anything that really, we recommend just having 2. It helps you, again, stay in the game. It's not always helpful if you get in your opening hand, but it's one of those things that if you had a game plan or you had something you really wanted to do, you still have the opportunity to do that thing.
Yeah, and unless it also forces your opponent that's why they would, and that's why you, when you're playing against them, will want to exile a creature. That way it's not in the graveyard, it's exiled, and they can't pull it back out. But I think it's cool too because it's almost like you're canceling another single target removal somebody did to you. So I've pulled out a really cool card and somebody just like, counter that or remove it. And then I'm like, oh man, bummer, it's sitting in my graveyard. What do I do to get it back? And again, not all decks have a ton of recursion in it, but it's good to have a few in any of your decks if you have them, even if that's not your main strategy, just so that you can pull those cards right back out.
And every color has a version of this. Some colors are better than others. Green can get any card. Black usually aims for creatures. White can go for artifacts or enchantments, or even lower powered creatures. Mm-hmm. Blue usually goes for instants and sorceries. Same thing with red. They all have a little variation on this. And you just pick whatever variation your colors allow. Get a little bit in there, and at least 2 is what we recommend.
All right, and there's the other category that we want you to think about when you're building your deck is protection. So having at least 2 protection spells, and depending on your deck, you might have more, you might have, but I would say at least have 2 things. And one very popular card that you'll find in a lot of commander decks is Swiftfoot Boots. It's 2 generic mono for an artifact equipment. And equipped creature has hexproof and haste, and you can equip for 1. So it's really common. You'll see people put Swiftfoot Boots out, and then as soon as they play their commander, they'll equip this equipment right to their commander. And yes, it's to give them haste, but also it's mostly for that hexproof, so they're not getting removed right away. And it's just, there's other forms of protection that are not artifacts, that are enchantments, or that are different sorts of spells. But think about it when you're playing the game, because the other person across from you is thinking about As soon as he brings out his commander, as soon as he brings out a really powerful card, I have an answer for him. So you want to have cards that help you protect the cards you want to play.
Exactly. And again, because it's such a commander-centric format, the format of Commander, big surprise there. You want to
Focus on your
protect
commander.
exactly. You want to protect your commander. Make sure it sticks around on the battlefield, because especially for a lot of decks, for a lot of experienced players, they just want to get rid of it as soon as they see it. And stuff like Swift Footprints, which again, such a common card, that you'll equip it. You'll have trouble dealing if your opponents have it, and they're having the same problem when you have it as well. They can't aim for it. And I also recommend Swift Footprints is such an iconic card, and that one just protects one creature, though. Feel free to also put some in your deck that protect all your things. There's a lot of cards that, gives all of your creatures indestructible, or gives them all hexproof, or all protection from a color or something. And protection can happen in a variety of ways.
Yes.
And you want to have as much flexibility as you can.
It's basically, you want to be able to have an answer for the answer. Like, you're going to be playing stuff, your opponent's going to be playing stuff. When your opponent plays stuff, you're going to want to have removal or counter spells or things that you can play at instant speed to combat them, basically, when you're not in combat, to deal with their stuff. And they're going to do the same to you. So having protection spells in your deck, I think, is definitely the way to go.
Exactly. And again, it's something that I always think about when I deck build. I know a lot of other experienced players will as well. And again, it's not critical if you're a first-time player, either of these two categories, but definitely I would recommend thinking about it while you do it. Add it in if you can, because it's going to make your deck better. I guarantee it.
It will. So let's go back and talk about this breakdown. So to recap, we want 20 to 30 creatures in our deck, 10 card draw spells, 10 mono ramp spells, 5 single target removal, 5 board wipes, 37 to 40 mana sources,
including 37 minimum lands.
37 minimum lands, 2 recursion spells, and 2 protection spells.
And again, there's going to be multiple ways you can hit these categories. You want to look for that synergy with your commander. And again, don't get too far away from what the commander does. I know I said this earlier, but I see it so often. I really just want to reiterate, just try to stick with what the commander deck wants to do. Don't stray too far from it, and then you'll see more consistency with the deck.
Yeah, and just enjoy the deck itself, the card, right? So like, just build around that. Go to edhrec.com. It'd be a plug for that. It's just it's a great way to make sure you're playing cards that work well with your commander. And you'll find that some of the recommended cards aren't necessarily that great, because maybe you don't like to play it in that way. So you find other cards that work. But this is just meant to be a really good blueprint, a good breakdown as far as these are the categories you want to hit, and you want to make sure you have these cards so that you play a balanced game.
Exactly. Hit these first, then think about the other things like tutors and other options that you can put in the deck that help it out, are good for the deck, but aren't necessarily as required to make the deck run.
Yeah. And so I think that'll do it for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we hope you come back next week.
Exactly. Leave us a comment and let us know what you think of the show. And don't forget to subscribe, or if you haven't yet.
Yeah, we love to bring this stuff to you. So check us out on Twitter. Check out our Patreon, and just we'll look forward to talking to you next week.
See you.